joining today, so we're going to wait another minute and then we'll get started.
Morning.
Morning, Sarah. Hello.
Hello. Good afternoon. Good evening.
Is that Sally? No. Who's that? We have people joining from Australia, which is great to see you. So good evening to you.
Hi, Catherine.
Hello. Hi, Joe. How are you?
Yeah, good.
Good.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi.
Hi, Catherine.
Well, I think we'll get started. We've got a few people I know that will still join, so we'll let those people filter in. But good morning to you from the UK. It's a very rainy day in the UK, so those of you in Australia can feel a bit chuffed to be in Australia heading into autumn at the moment. Thank you very much for joining us. We were saying yesterday there's so much content out there at the moment and so many webinars, so you're spoilt for choice, so thanks for choosing to invest a bit of time this morning or this evening, and we hope we won't let you down on that. And this is the 5th webinar in our series. We'll run for about 35 minutes, and Jonathan Males and myself will co-host this, doing different bits. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions or conversation comments or however it works. And for those of you that haven't joined us before, we are Metzana partners. So we're performance psychologists. We've got a background in working in elite sport as well as with businesses across the world and business leaders and teams in particular. So in a way, kind of a high pressure, fast-paced environment that we've seen over the last couple of months is our forte. And so this webinar it's obviously entitled Out of Crisis and Into Opportunity. And opportunity may seem like a strange word to use at the moment, but in any period of turmoil, disruption and challenge, there is of course opportunity. There's clearly commercial opportunity for some people, yes, but we're far more interested today in the opportunity to reinvent, reimagine, learn, grow, pivot, and that applies to us both personally, so as individuals, as family units even, and professionally in our roles as leaders and as organizations. And one of the interesting things we think is that we're going to have to do that here. It's not a nice to do, it's a must do. So Jonathan, if you could just either move the screen on or give me control to do that. Technical glitch, here we go. Thank you, Jonathan. And it brings to mind this really nice quote. This was the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, last week. So in reference to reopening the economy and reopening the city, he said, I don't want to just reopen. We learned a lot of lessons here, painfully, but we learned a lot. And that's what reimagine means to me. When we reopen, we're going to be better for it, and we're going to reimagine what life is. And we're going to improve for this pause, because it's not about a return to yesterday. There is no return to yesterday in life. This is about moving forwards. So what sticks out here to us is this sense of opportunity and the need to reimagine. And the other thing is that there is no return to normal. So that's a kind of common theme that is coming out in the last couple of weeks. And that's a challenge for us. It's a challenge anytime we change behavior and even small behaviors, but kind of big shifts in how we live and how we do business. That's a massive challenge. It's a massive challenge for us as individuals. It's a massive challenge as leaders and as businesses. And so this session is really going to it's going to pick up on that theme, and it will challenge you to think, and we're deliberately going to do that. We're going to prompt and stimulate thought. So you'll find the content of this, it's quite conceptual and deliberately so, and it may raise more questions than it answers, but that's highly intentional. So expect to come off this full of thought and maybe a bit confused, hopefully not. Okay. So, Jonathan, could you just move me on? I seem to have lost control of the slides again. This is like a dual control car where where you're in the passenger seat and can't move. So so the purpose of this webinar really is to help you, and I know most of you are leaders on this call, help you develop understanding of, I guess, the COVID-19 journey, just really understand what's the context we're in, what's the context we're heading into to help you better lead your organization and I guess exploit might be the wrong word, but reimagine and exploit that sense of opportunity. And so I will start and just talk through the territory that we're in. I'm going to present a simple framework to try and understand the journey that we're on. Jonathan is then going to pick up and share some principles of leading in that complex world, introduce us to some leadership archetypes, which might provide a framework for thinking about how we need to lead right now and in the future. And then a bit of a call to action around what you're going to do with that. And then, as I said, we'll finish up with a bit of time for some questions and some comments. So, map of the territory we're in. So you may well have heard of this acronym, VUCA, so standing for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it was a phrase coined by the US military actually in the 1980s to help officers lead in battle zones of Afghanistan and Iraq at the time, that presented at the time highly challenging and novel kind of battle context. And there's some really useful stuff for us at the moment. We are in a what feels like a highly VUCA environment, and unless you've had experience of being in battle zones or disaster management or in other high pressure environments, elite sport sometimes feels a bit like this at the highest level, as an example. But unless we've had experience of being in one of those contexts, chances are we're unequipped to both live through, work through, and in particular lead through these kinds of contexts. And the VUCA stuff offers us some useful leadership tips and guidance at this time. But we really like another framework which some of you may have come across called the Cynefin framework. And the Cynefin framework provides a little bit more relevance and value, we think, for us in the current situation. The Cynefin framework, I'll talk through it in a minute, but it was put forward, it was developed by David Snowden and Mary Boone in 2007. There's a great Harvard Business Review paper if you want to dive into the detail of it, if it appeals to you. But they describe 5 different contexts, and each context there's a leadership strategy and decision-making framework relevant for each context. So I'm going to talk through the 5 different contexts. So 2 of the contexts are ordered and predictable. And we ordinarily probably spend most of our time in these 2 contexts. There are clear rules. We have a really good understanding of the territory. It's familiar to us. There's cause and effect. There's processes we follow. There's a simple context, which is very straightforward. Everything's predictable, repeatable. We've very quickly recognized patterns and can make very simple decisions. An example here might be, as a business, we have maybe times of the year that are peaks that we need to produce more or deploy more resource. We know exactly when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen, and therefore it's a very simple process to respond. So in decision-making terms, we sense, we categorize very easily, and then we respond. There is a marvelous predictability and simplicity about it. And then a complicated context, it's still ordered on the ordered side of the framework, and there's still cause and effect. The cause and effect may not always be as readily evident. There's more information, there might be some unknowns, there's more processing required, but there is still a logic to it and it still fits in order. So an example might be, on a very simple level, where our car is sounding noisy, or we know there's something wrong with it, we don't know what. So in this instance, we might bring in expert judgment to help us respond appropriately. So, but there is a distinct order, and there is still a clear logical map of the territory for us. And then we move on to the two disordered contexts. So we have complex, where there is no right answer evident. There is cause and effects relationships that are very hard to see on first encountering them. They're not often repeatable cause and effect relationships. We often have interconnected parts, linked information. There's constant flux. It's a territory for us. It's very hard to make sense of. There are dependencies. Decision making is not simple. Decisions are contingent on multiple facts, and decisions may be contingent on multiple decisions. So it's new territory for us. It's highly unpredictable, and it's highly demanding as a context. And in this instance, we need to probe first, so do a lot of understanding, try and really take time to get to grips with the new world we're in, or the world we're in, sense, and then respond. I'll pick up on this in a moment. And then the last context is a chaotic context, which is incoherent. Again, there's even less information to link, and harder to make sense of the context we're in. In this instance, we're often trying to staunch the bleeding. So a chaotic context might be something where there's been a big seismic event, and we're trying to staunch the bleeding and create some stability and make quick decisions. So in this instance, we are acting first, then collecting information, and then continuing to respond and evolve that. And then at the middle is a disordered context, which are highly unusual kind of context, but where there is complete disorder and nothing to grab onto in terms of understanding the territory. So our proposition and our value, we think that this framework adds at the moment, is that we think the wider context has moved from chaotic to complex. So the first few weeks felt very chaotic, very fast-paced, we had decisions to make quickly. There was misinformation, new information coming to us the whole time, decisions to make quickly. And over the last few weeks, probably over the last 3 or 4 weeks, we've settled in to a different pace, a different way of operating, and it feels like a complex context. So chaos required very clear direction, rapid decision making, and complexity for us requires a different approach. And there's a nice quote there from the Cynefin paper. So it says that instead of attempting to impose a course of action, we must patiently allow the path to reveal itself. So we need to probe first, then sense, then respond. It's a different way of leading. And I think what's important here is we're likely to be living in a pretty volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous environment for the foreseeable future. It still very much feels like that. There's still a lack of certainty. There's a lack even of expertise or definitive expertise, as we talk right now in how to come out of lockdown, wearing of masks and so on. So there's complexity, there's diversity of opinion, and it feels very much like we are living with uncertainty and ambiguity for the immediate and foreseeable future. And just to summarize here, the 3 contexts we think are relevant. So go back to the chaos context. The first few weeks, very fast-paced, unpredictable. Things happen very quickly. There was that almost distortion of time in those early weeks as decisions happened thick and fast. It felt unsafe. It felt threatening. People were highly anxious, very uncertain. We had very little control over what was happening and the pace of it. From a leadership point of view, what was required at that point, very quick decision making, clear guidance and communication, and leadership teams to step up together. And we certainly, heard of leadership teams that did a great job of doing that. From an individual point of view, people experience rapid change. They move very quickly to remote working and then isolated living, balancing demands as the schools shut down of childcare, a reduction in freedom, and having to adapt very quickly to new ways of connecting both work and socially. And then the complex environment, which felt like it was probably around Easter time, moving to a complex environment, still dynamic, interdependent. There were novel challenges that we were all facing. From a leadership point of view, the leadership required in this phase is very much around experimenting. So taking more time, not having to make decisions at the pace we had to make them in the chaotic phase. And in fact, needing to take more time to really understand the world the new world we're in, how the new rules work, the cause and effect, and trying to anticipate the near and slightly further away future. We're in a cycle of planning and replanning, of taking on new information. And the word emergent refers to an emergent decision making. So decisions or patterns emerge, and we can respond on the basis of that. And individually, people are in the phase of experimenting, evolving how they live and work remotely, trying to sustain that energy, letting go of that old world. So kind of psychologically, trying to let go of hankering after the world pre-COVID-19. And then as we go through, we may well move to a complicated stage. So as we make sense of this world, and as we we know more, we have definitive expertise, we have more certainty, we will start to move to a complicated world where we have rules. The rules are becoming clearer, particularly as we think about coming out of lockdown. We're understanding at the moment what's that meaning for our businesses. So we'll move into a complicated context. And arguably, in fact, the coming out of lockdown plan, it is actually a complicated context or complicated problem to solve. So the rules are emerging, rules are becoming clearer. We have more knowns, we have more facts, certainty. As a leader, what's important here is really starting to be much more future focused. So scanning the horizon, and not just the next 3 months, but the next 6, 12, 18 months. We're constantly learning, we're constantly gathering information. We need to be seeking out expertise. We need to be using others or having people around us that are doing that as well. We need to brainstorm. We need to get great at predicting a new future and what that means for us. And individually, people will be adapting to a new way of living and working. We'll need to be accepting of what that looks like as well, accepting of a new future. So I hope that's given you a little bit of theoretical understanding, very simple and helpful framework. And by all means, do go and seek out the paper which gives more detail on that. I'm going to pass you over to Jonathan now. Before I do that, a couple of questions just to leave you with. So the first one is really how does your context fit into that? And I think what's interesting here that some people and some businesses may be in different stages. So we have some of our clients are in hospitality, and they're probably through into a complicated world right now. They had very chaotic first couple of weeks. Then they moved to complex, and then complicated. Other clients may still be in a sense of feeling you're still coming out the back of a chaotic environment. So have a reflect, have a think. Where do you feel you are right now? Do you recognize the shifts? When did they happen over the past couple of months through this journey? And without further ado, I will now definitely pass you over to Jonathan and pick up on some leadership principles and archetypes.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. So let's look at what it means to actually lead in this strange and complex world that we're in. To begin with, I think there are three at least three dimensions of polarities that leaders need to be able to manage. We need to be able to manage people, and we need to manage the task. We need to manage things that are stable, and we need to manage things that are changing and dynamic. We need to be able to focus on the very immediate, the here and now, and we need to be able to focus on the future. It's not a matter of either or, it's both and. These are all important. And it's a huge challenge for us as people to be able to hold these different polarities in place and not privilege one or the other. Most of us would find we've got a place of most comfort in any of these places. We're either people, task people. We like things stable, we like things dynamic. We're here and now, we're future. But the challenge in the complex world is to be able to bridge both within ourselves and not just default to where we sit, but also as a leadership team. And one of the really important principles here is that I think it's pretty tough to ask any one leader to manage and hold these three domains in their head at the one time. That's a really tall order. And this isn't a time for heroes. You may remember this, Mad Max. We don't need another hero. This was written in 1983 or 1985 or something. When the world went to pot, you know, it's interesting we think about archetypes. There's a great desire in our psyche to have a hero who will emerge and save us. We can all think of the heroic leader who steps out of the ashes, comes forward and saves the world. That's not where we are now. We're not in a time for heroes anymore. And so when we're talking here about archetypes for the 2020s, part of that is letting go of this idea that any one person can save us, that any one of us has got all the ideas, any one of us has got the capacity to hold past, present, task people in the head at the one time. Our argument, our proposition here is that the type of frameworks for leadership we need are much more about the capacities within a leadership team. It's unrealistic to expect one person is going to do all of this. It's not going to work. So we're suggesting here that for the 2020s, there are at least 4 archetypes, 4 frameworks, 4 ways of leading that are going to be really critical. And you know, if you're in charge of a team or a business, you need to be thinking about how you're accessing these different archetypes. So let me explain. The first one we call the hearth holder. And this is the leadership archetype that's focused on the practicalities, on keeping things stable and safe, looking after people, processes, systems, making sure that things work well. I think there's a couple of good examples today. I think that if you put his choice of politics aside, Rishi Sunak, the UK Chancellor, is really channeling this at the moment. He's looking after doing his very best to look after the security and safety of the practical elements of the economy and people. I think at a bigger picture level, David Attenborough would be a great example of the hearth holder for the planet. He's making us pay attention to the well-being of all systems. So that's the hearth holder archetype, and it's about ensuring the well-being and that things work well. The next archetype, which we think really important, we call it the coach, or perhaps the mentor, and this is a people-focused leader, looking after people, and particularly not just looking after them. So this isn't just caring. More importantly, this is about helping people to learn and adapt. Really, really important point here. It's not just about caring, it's about helping people to learn, change, adapt and grow. And that's so critical. If you think about the context that Catherine was talking about, it's constantly changing. We're having to learn really fast, we're having to make sense, we're having to change. So this form of leadership is all about enabling people to do so and attending to the human needs. I think probably New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is a good example of this at the moment. Then we have an archetype we call the explorer, and this is much more action oriented. In a complex world, it's about navigating. And for me, the image that comes to mind are those early polar explorers where they had to get there, Shackleton, Amundsen, getting the people across a hostile environment where there wasn't a known path. You knew what the destination was. You wanted to get to the North Pole, but you didn't know how to get there. And you had to make sure that you got all your people, supplies, the logistics, the practicalities, and you kept people moving. And you made decisions as you went. It wasn't about being on a railway line where you're following a set destination. exploring is about adapting, changing, responding to the environment in pursuit of your purpose, in pursuit of getting to your North Pole, wherever you're heading to. I think Bill Gates is an example of this. He's been quite prescient in terms of some of the things he's been saying, pushing for the use of investing in healthcare, epidemiology. He's looking ahead. The final archetype, which we think is really important, we call the agitator. And this is the style of leadership which is about actually inventing new things, being willing to break old things. We can't go back to old ways of working, so we need to invent some new ways. And that relies on people being willing to step up and challenge and provoke. I think two examples of this, again, from different wings, different political wings, from political leadership. Dominic Cummings, I think, is an agitator. He's certainly willing to break things. And Antonio Ortega-Cortez in the US, the young Democrat Congresswoman. She's speaking up, she's challenging, she's speaking truth to power. So these different archetypes help us deal with complexity in different ways, because the coach and the explorer archetypes map across people and task. The householder and the agitator map across stable and dynamic. So here's a way we can start to see we can hold these different dynamics together by embodying different types of leadership. And I think all of them, wherever you are, whichever ones of these archetypes you're using, then you've got to be thinking future and long term. That transcends all of them. So we're not saying that you sit in a box. This isn't another typology. This is a way of thinking about a way of leading, a leadership energy, and we're saying that all are important. It's very unlikely that one person will be able to embody all four, which is why teams and leadership teams become absolutely important at the moment to get the right talents in the room. So if we're going to go back to a Hollywood metaphor, it's much less Mad Max and much more Avengers Assemble. We're getting the right team together here. So a little thought experiment for you here. Imagine you've got 20 chips and each one represents a unit of you or your team's leadership energy. How would you currently be spreading your chips across these quadrants? Would you have 5 in each box? Would you have 10 in one and 5? Just a little thought experiment for a second. Where is your energy going right now? And if you've got a team around you, where is your team's energy going? Just have a think about where your energy is going. Which ones of these you're aware of already, you're focusing on, and which ones maybe you're not giving much attention to. And then given the context, and that will vary for all of you, as Catherine said, for some of you, you might have a sense that you're moving out of chaos into a new space. For some of you, you might still be in that chaotic space trying to get things to land. For some of you, you might be further down the track and things are really settling, getting back to something that feels a bit more predictable. Where do you need to allocate your energy? Where do you need to shift? Where do you need to step up, or where do you need to step down where your energy is going? So on the basis that you might want to make some changes, I'm going to talk about each of these quadrants in turn with the question of, so what if you need to do more? So for each of these, what are some practical things you can do to increase any of these 4 archetypes and how they're being embodied within your team, within your business? So this is around taking action at the moment. So if you decided that you needed to coach more, if you felt that you needed to put more chips in the top left-hand corner of the quadrant, key thing here is to understand people as individuals right now, particularly in this working from home context. So to make sure that you understand the people in your team, what their environment is at home, their responsibilities, family, they have children to look after, what's their previous experience of working at home, and have they got a decent support network? And what makes them tick? You know, some people are really thriving at the moment. Some people aren't. There's a pattern to that. You know, understand your people, understand, you know, if they're thriving, terrific. Why is that and how can you keep them thriving? If they're disappearing, if they're not coping, how can you help them resurface? So spend a little bit of time paying attention to your people as people, understand them with a bit of depth. And then the second thing here is about sustaining well-being. You know, we've all got basic human needs, so help your people stay connected. Help them stay purposeful. It's interesting at the moment hearing people going on furlough, helping people who aren't so busy. Keep them connected to the purpose of what you're trying to do together. That's really important for motivation. Give people as much freedom as possible. In conditions of lockdown, we've lost some freedom. So within the working context, give people as much autonomy and freedom to pursue their roles in pursuit of your purpose as you can. If you decided that you need to explore more, so this is the top right, this is being more future focused, this is trying to sort of get out and make sense of the world. A key skill here is the ability to look for patterns. In a complex world, it's very hard to see what's coming up, so we've got to look for patterns, and the understanding sort of comes a little bit in hindsight. So the more we can look out for patterns and see them, the quicker we can respond and quicker we can be on the case. So it's really important here to open up your horizons, to take the time to look and see what's going on in other places. In the chaotic environment, we get very tunnel visioned. We get focused on, okay, how do I survive right now? Now's the time to actually start and to think and to look, what's going on? What's going on in adjacent sectors, in different parts of the economy? What's going on in other parts of the world? What's going on in New Zealand where they're starting to open up? What's going on in Germany? What's going on? How do I learn from that? How do we get ahead of the curve by looking out and looking beyond the immediate world that we're in right now? And it's really important here to share those insights with your team. So get out of your head and start talking to your colleagues about this. Share your observations, share your theories, share your questions. And in particular, if you can use some visual tools, and there's some great online options for doing this now, but create mind maps, draw the connections between things. See if you can get together with your team and set up a virtual whiteboard and draw a mind map of what's going on in your world right now. Because you're looking for the connections between things. You're exploring, this is happening over here. What's the impact of that on us? So look for patterns, look for connections, try to join the dots together as a team. Really, really important in terms of sense making. Critical for a complex environment. Okay, now let's decide perhaps if you wanted to agitate more, if this was where your chips were sparse on the table. A key principle here is the idea of a safe to fail experiment. What this means is that you need to start to challenge yourself and others and actually challenge people to do things differently and find new ways of working, to experiment. But those experiments need to be done within safe parameters. So it's not, if you're a leader, you don't simply say to your people, do what you want. That is probably never a wise thing without any kind of boundaries. You need to set safe enough boundaries so that if things go wrong, no one gets hurt. So you want to make sure that if you're asking people to do things differently, that you're protecting against the worst case in terms of financial loss or loss of reputation or people being hurt. And it's interesting, if you think about the government strategy in the UK at the moment to coming out of lockdown, they're essentially setting this up as a safe to fail experiment. They're not saying this is what should happen. They're saying these are the parameters within which we will allow things to happen. We don't want the death rate to go beyond this. We need to make sure we've got this much testing. We need to make sure that this and that will happen. So they're setting parameters within which a movement towards lockdown can occur. Now, that's a version of a safe to fail experiment. I don't think they're using that language, but that's what they're doing. They're not prescribing what to do. They're prescribing limits within which you can do all sorts of stuff. The same principle applies within your teams, within your businesses. If you want people to learn, you've got to give them the freedom to do that, but you've also got to give them the safety to do that. People need to understand that actually failure is okay because you've set up the limits to make sure that nothing super bad is going to happen. But the key thing with these is you're wanting people to learn. You're wanting to come back with new information and new insights as a result of doing something different. And that then allows you to do more of what works. So through your experiments, through your giving people appropriate freedoms, you discover in this complex world, what is it that works? Because a lot of the old rules don't work anymore. So this is a way of discovering the new rules, the new ways of actually bringing about change or becoming more effective or developing new products or looking after your customers in new ways in a complex environment. And that helps you build your understanding of the system. Finally, so if you want to look after your hearth a bit more, We think this is a really important time to rethink your basic assumptions about how you work. This is the Andrew Cuomo code. There's no going back to where we were. Now's the time to rethink. And perhaps this is a once in a lifetime or once in a generation opportunity to reimagine how we work. So we're really encouraging you to start within your sphere of influence. That might be just within you as an individual practitioner. It might be your team, it might be your division, your business unit, or even your whole company. I know we've got at least one CEO on the call at the moment. Okay, so within your sphere of influence, how can you reimagine a better world in the future? We think there are three particular areas to look at here. That's your purpose, to make sure it's meaningful, to think about your supply chains, and to think about human-centered processes. Let's look at each of these in turn. We know that people more and more now are questioning, am I doing something that's worthwhile? Is this how I want to be spending my time? So are you clear about your purpose? Is it now time to revisit your why? Why do we do this? Should this change or could this change as a result of the changes we're going through as a society and as a planet right now? Because if you want to engage your people and customers in the future, in the emerging world, it's going to really help if your purpose is meaningful. You know, we've stripped away a lot of trivia. We've stripped away a lot of the dross through this period. What's rebuilt needs to have some meaning to it. And if it doesn't, I don't think you're going to survive in the future. So now is a great time to be rethinking, why are we here and is it meaningful? And can we reshape or reposition to be even more meaningful for ourselves, for our clients, for our employees in the future? The second area is about sustainability, and to think about where you fit in your whole supply chain, your supply ecosystem. Where do your resources come from? Do you know? Have you thought about that? Where whatever your input is as a business, where does it come from? How resilient is that as a supply chain for you? All the economists now are saying we're going to go through a period of deglobalization, of increasing localization. So are you resilient? Where do your products go when they're finished? Have you thought this through? Whatever it is that you produce, when it's finished, where does it end up? Because it goes somewhere. Does it go to landfill? Does it get recycled? Is it repurposed? Think about the real impact of what you're doing right now. You're not simply operating as an individual bubble. We're all part of a complex ecosystem right now. And now's the time to think about what's our place in that, what's our connection with that. And finally, being more human-centered. What have you learned about your people in these last few weeks? How resourceful are they? How adaptable are they? How resilient are they? How trustworthy are they? So I'll tell you what, I've lost track of the number of people who have said to me, we didn't think we railed against home working for years, and now we're forced to do it. And guess what? We discovered that our people can cope from working with home. We've discovered that if we give them the right resources and technology, they can be just as productive as home as they are in the office. Wow. Okay. What does that mean for the future? What does that mean for your policies and your processes about how you expect people to travel? What do you expect this to mean about their work from home requirements? How do you reward people? Do you think it's going to be possible in the future to go back and pay, NHS nurses the minimum wage? I don't think so. We need to rethink that. So within your sphere of influence, can you rethink how you really make the most of people in the future? It seems to me that one of the huge resources we're going to have in the future is in-person time, actually meeting someone face to face. That's not, we can't take that for granted. How do you make the most of that? How do you really privilege the fact that meeting someone in person or getting a group together in person is going to be a huge investment in so many ways? How do you make the most of that? How do you really privilege human contact? So there you go, 3 areas to reimagine the future around purpose, sustainable supply, and human-centered processes. And on the right, here are some really good references because you don't have to invent any of this. There have been people thinking about this stuff for years. Simon Sinek has written a book called The Infinite Game, brilliant in terms of purpose and long-term thinking. A woman called Kate Raworth from Oxford has done some exceptional work on a model called donut economics. which is a superb map for understanding more a sustainable way of working. And if you want to think about human-centered processes, I'd highly recommend Frederick Laloux's book, Reinventing Organisations. So it's a time to reimagine, it's a time to think, but you're not the pioneers here. There have been people thinking about this stuff for years. Get on board, take this opportunity to rethink these key areas of your business. Because we've got to face a new reality. And I think, Catherine, I'm handing over to you at this point to finish up. Is that right?
I thought you were doing this, but I can.
Let me go on a roll.
Keep going.
Yeah. So look, here's a quote we love. This is not a time for falling back on comfortable ideology. We need to get off the beaten track, reinvent ourselves, and find new ways of living, not least of all me. And that was no one less than President Macron of France. And there's a great quote we found from The Guardian. Everything has changed and we need to prepare for the new normal. Lockdown isn't ending. There is no simple choice between saving lives and saving the economy. The two are intertwined. There's no going back to BC before Corona. Another one of those polarities. It's not either or. We're not separate from the economy. The economy is part of a bigger ecosystem. Yeah, we've got to hold that polarity together. Terrific. Okay.
Great. I will finish with a few final thoughts. Yeah. So yeah, just a quick summary. If I can move the slides on, here we go. So a few key things. Firstly is, we haven't touched on this, but manage yourself. We have touched on it with the leadership archetype, but really this is an opportunity, as Jonathan said, to reinvent, to rethink, to reflect, to do things differently in the future, short term and long term. So learning is a really key part right now. Lead as a team. So this requires collaboration. It requires exploration and experimentation together. So never more important has teamwork been. Look for patterns. We're in unfamiliar, complex territory. Patterns will emerge, but keenly and actively look for them. Be a great student, now mine information over the coming weeks. And the notion of safe to fail experiments is another key point aligned to that. And really grab this opportunity to reimagine your future, personally, professionally, organisationally. Great. We have a few minutes left for any questions, or indeed if anybody wants to share any thoughts or anything that really resonated for them and provoked some thought. We have 32 people on the call, so that's quite a lot. Please do take yourself off mute if you want to say something, ask a question, or share a reflection. So over to you. Anybody want to share anything, ask anything?
I was just thanking Gary Buxton for putting me onto this via LinkedIn and from Australia. And it's been really useful to use that framework of archetypes to look at how leaders are managing in this space and seeing the chaos and seeing how a single kind of command and control approach isn't necessarily an adaptive long-term strategy. And this idea of the hero, I think is really important for me and my observations in the organisations that I work for, and that you actually need to gather around you this team of people with this diverse range of capability and thinking, and that you will have people naturally in your teams that are pattern people, that they will naturally look for patterns, and others might be much more pragmatic, focused people. So really important to draw on the capabilities of teams at the moment, and you've made that abundantly clear, and I've really appreciated it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Nikki.
Thanks, Nikki.
Anybody else? And while I know some people have got to dive off the call, so while we're in the last few minutes, please Please do add your email address to the chat box if you'd like a copy of the slides. We'll drop you a line, and we're also very happy if you want to have a follow-up 30-minute free coaching call. We'd be delighted to do that and drop that in an email to you as well. Any other reflections or questions?
Yeah, just hi, Catherine and
Hi,
John.
Hetty.
Hi there. As always, absolutely illuminating, and you manage always to pull together such complex material and make it so accessible and clear. I was in a meeting yesterday, which was fascinating, with a bunch of colleagues and people from various parts of the world who are working with some big organizations, big airlines, for example. And one of the things that's being talked about now, which I think is incredibly challenging, is the idea of steady state organizations. Rather, you know, what you're talking about, challenging the assumptions, this idea that we can have exponential growth, this idea of a linear growth going upwards, and that what would it be to take your archetypes, which is exactly in a sense what you're saying, and saying, put the health of the organization, its supply chain, its people, its product first, rather than this abstract notion of growth. And I know that that's what Kate Raworth does in donut economics. But what's very exciting about this, I think, is it's really challenging all our assumptions of what business needs to look like and the way business interacts with society. And that's where, you know, I think that coaching, creating that space to have those discussions so that they're safe rather than people blaming each other, is what I'm seeing right now. It's incredibly important. So just really wanted to add that in, that it's going into reshaping the whole purpose of organizations. And this term steady state organizations, I thought was an interesting new one that was being.
Great, thanks, Hetty. Anybody else? Any more from any more? Fantastic. Okay, well, we are just over the 3/4 of an hour. So thank you very much for joining us wherever you are in the world. Have a good evening to those in Australia. It's probably now time to have a glass of wine down there, and it's time to have another coffee here. We will drop you an email with the resources and an offer of a follow-up call. So please do make sure that if you want to do that, put your email address in the chat box. But other than that, thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day wherever you are.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, folks. Go well.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm still here. I just thought I would say, well done. That was really good, both of you. Incredible.
Thank you. I'm just trying to stop the recording. Hang on.